Sing or we throw you out, the rich guests laughed, pointing at the poor woman in torn shoes. She started to sing.
In this silence, I find my home, a light to guide me, I am whole.
By the last note, the billionaire had dropped his glass, fallen to his knees, and whispered one name. The whole room went silent. How did she know that song, and why was he crying? To understand how a poor cleaner brought the strongest man in the city to his knees, we have to go back 6 days, to a small room behind a market where a woman was counting coins that were never going to be enough. Her name was Amara. 24 years old, she lived in one rented room where the roof leaked when it rained and the landlord knocked when it did not. She counted her money 3 times that morning, as if the number might take pity on her and grow. It did not, and rent was due in 2 days. Amara had been raised far from the city by an old woman she called Mama Zuri, not her mother by blood, but the only mother she had ever known. And for as long as she could remember, Mama Zuri had told her a story that sat in her chest like a stone, that her real family had thrown her away when she was a baby, like something broken and unwanted. Amara believed it. She had no reason not to. That belief was the first thing that would turn out to be a lie. The only beautiful thing Amara owned was a song, a soft, sad lullaby in an old dialect she barely understood, the words worn smooth from years of Mama Zuri singing it over her cot. She hummed it while she scrubbed floors and while she cooked her one meal a day. She had no idea where it truly came from, only that it made her feel for a few seconds like she belonged to someone. She could not have guessed that this song was a key or what it was about to unlock. When the labor agency called with one night of cleaning work at a rich man's party, Amara said yes before the woman finished her sentence. The pay was small, but small beat nothing, and nothing was what she had. She did not ask whose house it was. If she had known, she might have been too afraid to go. She looked down at her shoes, old things, the soles peeling away from the leather like tired lips. There was no money for new ones and no time to find any, so she bound them with thread and prayed they would survive the night. In a place like the one she was going to, shoes like that were as good as a target painted on her feet. The address was not a house, it was a palace behind a tall gate, white pillars and a fountain lit gold, cars in the driveway worth more than she would earn in 3 lifetimes. Uniformed men opened doors for women dressed in shimmering wrappers and heavy jewelry. And at the top of the marble steps stood the owner of all of it, Chief Obina, one of the richest men in the country, a man who, guests whispered, had not truly smiled in over 20 years. Nobody at that party seemed to know why. None certainly did not. Not yet. The head of staff met the cleaners at the service door, a broad man named Kalu, with a hard face and colder eyes. He inspected them like livestock, hands, uniforms, feet. At Amara's shoes, he stopped short. "You want to shame me in front of Chief's guests?" he snapped, and walked off before she could answer, sending her to the farthest corner of the great hall with an order to stay invisible. In that house, she was learning, the poor were furniture that moved. For 2 hours she managed it, drifting between tables, clearing plates, keeping her ruined shoes tucked out of sight. But a room full of bored, wealthy people is always hunting for something small to laugh at, and eventually the hunt found her. The first to notice was Chief Obina's wife, Chinyelo. Chinyelo was young and striking, poured into a down that moved like water, and she had married Obina only 3 years earlier. What the guests didn't know, what even Obina didn't fully know, was that Tunde, the chief's lawyer, had first introduced Chinyelo into his lonely friend's life. She reported to Tunde more faithfully than she ever answered to her husband, and right then her sharp eyes had landed on a cleaner's broken shoes. "Come here," Chinyelo called, sweet as syrup, and every head at her end of the hall turned. She pointed one manicured finger. "Look at what wandered into my husband's house tonight." The laughter started around her like a fire catching dry grass. A heavy man with rings on every finger leaned forward, grinning. "A beggar in the palace. Tell us, beggar, can you do anything at all? Can you dance? Can you sing?" Amara shook her head and stepped back, but Chinello lifted a hand. "Did I say you could leave?" The room felt airless, and across the hall, unseen by anyone, a tall man in a lawyer's suit set down his drink and watched the cleaner very carefully. The way a man watches a door he thought he had locked years ago. "Sing, or we throw you out," the rich guests laughed, pointing at the poor woman in torn shoes. To them, it was sport, nothing more. They wanted tears or a scramble for the exit, something to talk about tomorrow. But Amara had been laughed at her whole life, and somewhere inside her a thing had gone quiet and tired and past fear. So she gave them what they had not asked for. She raised her chin, and she sang. The old words rose soft into the bright, cruel room. The laughter thinned first, then died, because there was something in that voice that had no business belonging to a cleaner in thread-tied shoes. A beauty so plain and pure it made the gold on the walls look like tin. Guests turned from every corner, and at the foot of the grand staircase, a wine glass slipped from Chief Obina's fingers and burst across the marble. He was staring at her the way a man stares at the dead. His knees buckled. Then, in front of 200 people, the most powerful man in the room walked forward and sank to the floor at the feet of a cleaner, and one word fell out of his mouth, cracked open like a wound. Nkeka. Amara stood rigid over him, because she had never in her life heard that name. Who was Nkeka? And why would a billionaire weep at the feet of a woman he had never met? Amara did not have a single answer, only the strange, dizzy certainty that the song she had carried since childhood was not a song at all. It was a door, and it had just come off its hinges. Obina reached for her hand, his fingers trembling like an old man's. He whispered, "Please, tell me." Amara had never heard a rich man beg anyone for anything, least of all her, and she had no answer that would not sound like madness. Before she could try, a hand closed on the chief's shoulder, steady, practiced, certain. The tall man in the lawyer's suit, his name was Tunde, and for more than 20 years he had been Obina's closest friend and personal lawyer. "Obina, you are unwell. Come, your guests are staring." His tone was gentle, his grip was not. And when his eyes moved to Amara, there was no surprise in them at all. There was fear, but no one in that hall knew Tunde well enough to tell one from the other. That night, Chief Obina did a thing he had not done in 22 years. He asked a stranger to stay. He gave Amara a room, silenced his baffled staff, and promised her answers in the morning. She lay awake in a bed softer than anything she had touched, daring for the first time to imagine her luck had turned. In that house, though, luck usually wore a smile and carried a knife. In the morning, he told her the story he had never told in full. 22 years ago, he was not rich, just a young builder with a small firm, a head full of dreams, and a wife he loved past all reason. Her name was Nkeka, and every night Nkeka had sung their baby daughter to sleep with a lullaby from her own mother's people in that same old dialect. It was a family song, she used to say, never written down, never sung outside their walls. It was the song Amara had sung the night before. "You have to understand," Obina said, turning his cup in his hands. "That song was never on any radio. It was never at any party. Nkeka sang it only in our home, only to our child." His voice thinned. "So there are only two ways a person could know it. They were inside my house when my daughter was small, or they learned it from someone who was." He did not yet see what he had just said, but Amara would carry those words like a lit match. Then he told her about the fire. One night, 22 years ago, their home had burned to the ground. Nkeka died, their baby died. The bodies, he was told, were too badly burned to bury properly. The investigation ruled it an accident, a fallen kerosene lamp, faulty wiring, an old house full of wood. I did not question it, Obinna admitted, ashamed. I could not even stand. Tunde handled everything, the police, the reports, the burial. He was the only reason I survived that year. He did not hear how much he had just confessed. But someone had made very sure that fire was ruled an accident, and that someone had been standing beside him at the funeral. There was one more thing, and Obinna said it almost as an apology to a dead woman. In her final weeks, Nneka had changed, jumpy, watchful, forever at her church. Once she had pressed his hand and told him, "I have given Pastor Jelani something to keep. If anything happens to me, go to him." Obinna had blamed it on the nerves of a young mother and never gone. "I thought it was foolishness," he whispered. "God forgive me, I never went." He meant it as grief. Amara filed away the name Pastor Jelani without knowing she would one day stake everything on it. For 3 days she stayed, and for the first time in her life she felt the terrible warmth of hope. Obinna arranged a private DNA test, quietly. He watched her across rooms as though she might dissolve. And slowly, Amara let herself believe the impossible, that she had a father, that she had not been thrown away. Hope, offered to someone who has only ever known its absence, is the sharpest blade of all. It was in those 3 days that she first really spoke to Kofi. He was a junior clerk from Tunde's law firm, sent to ferry documents, clumsy and quiet and out of place among the marble. He was also the only person in that palace who looked at Amara as if she were a person. "Careful of the smiles in this house," he told her once by the garden wall, keeping his voice low. "This place eats people and calls it hospitality." She did not understand him then. She would. The next day he brought her a proper pair of shoes. He mumbled that they were left over from some office event, but he could not meet his eyes when he said it, and she knew he had bought them with money he did not have. They sat together on the back step while she tried them on, and he told her about his mother in the village, sick, waiting on the little he sent home. "You send everything to someone who raised you, and somehow it is never enough." Amara thought of Mama Zuri and could not speak. 2 poor people in a rich man's garden, recognizing their own reflection in each other. He came looking for her the 3rd evening just to make sure she had eaten. She caught herself waiting at the window until she saw his bus pull away safely down the road. Neither of them named the thing that was growing, but it was already there, and it was already a thing that could be used as a weapon. On the 4th day, the hope broke. Tunde called a meeting in the study and arrived carrying papers and a mournful face, like a doctor with bad news. "The DNA result is back," he said, sliding the page toward Obinna. "My friend, I am so sorry. It is negative. She is no relation to you at all." The word landed, and something in the room seemed to lower its head. "That is not possible," Amara breathed. But Tunde had already turned on her, sorrow curdling into contempt. "You learned the story. You learned the song somehow, and you came to feed on a grieving man's wound. I have watched it happen to him again and again." He faced Obinna gently. "How many women have come to this door swearing they were your lost daughter? 5? 6? Each one after your money. You promised yourself you would not be made a fool again." And that was the thing that closed Obinna's heart, because it was true. For 22 years, fraudsters had come pretending to be his child, and each one had reopened the grave. The negative result didn't just convince him, it rescued him from the unbearable risk of hoping. Reeling, half relieved, he didn't think to demand a second test at another laboratory. Why pay to be wounded twice? He simply looked at Amara with the beginnings of doubt, and doubt in that man was the most dangerous thing in the house. "Chief, please," Amara said, moving toward him. "I did not come here for anything. Your own wife sent me from the agency." Chinello's voice cut across like a blade. "My husband is not your father, you filthy liar. Get out!" This time, no one intervened. Kalu took her arm and marched her to the gate, and the great doors of the palace shut behind her with the soft, final sound of a lid coming down. She stood in the road in her new shoes and shook. But that paper was a lie, and she had already decided she was going to prove it. She did not go home to weep. She went to the newspaper archive in the old part of the city and spent her last coins on dusty back issues from 22 years before, hunting for the fire. She found it, a small column, a young builder's family lost to a tragic accidental blaze. One detail snagged her. The family's own lawyer had personally briefed the press and assisted the investigation to its swift conclusion. The lawyer's name, Tunde. She sat in that quiet room with her heart going like a drum, because a man who buries a story that fast is a man with something to bury. Only then did she travel to Mamazuri, not for comfort now, but for the truth, armed with a question that had teeth. She found the old woman thin and gray and coughing in her bed, and Mamazuri took one look at Amara's face and began to cry. "You found them," she wept. "God forgive me. They found you." Amara sat down slowly and asked her, at last, where the song came from. What Mamazuri confessed cracked the whole world open. 22 years ago, she had not been an old villager. She had been a young househelp in the city, employed by a gentle young couple, Obina and Neka, minding their baby girl, a girl named Amara. "You were never thrown away," she sobbed. "You were carried out of a burning house to keep you breathing." Amara gripped the edge of the bed as the floor of her whole life gave way. "That fire was set," Mamazuri went on, clutching her hand. "I was in the back room with you when the men came. I heard them talking. I heard the petrol. I went through the window with you against my chest, and I ran, and I did not stop for 22 years, because I heard the man giving the orders, and it was a voice from that house, a voice I knew." Amara leaned in. "Whose voice, Mama?" The old woman answered with a name, and then reached beneath her mattress. She drew out something wrapped in old cloth, a photograph, half of it charred black, the edges curled by heat. In the surviving half, a young Obina held a laughing baby, and beside him stood a woman with kind, tired eyes, Neka. Amara looked into her mother's face for the first time. Then Mamazuri turned the picture over and pointed to faded handwriting on the back. "Your mother gave me this the week before she died. She was already frightened." The words read, "If anything happens to me, it was Tunde. He will not stop." "She made two," Mamazuri whispered, and Amara's breath caught because now the pieces snapped together. The church, the nerves, the thing Neka had begged Obina to collect. She wrote it twice, one for me, one she carried to her priest with a letter and told him to open it only if she died badly. A young pastor, Jelani. The name Obina had confessed and ignored, the name Amara had quietly kept. Now she understood that her mother, terrified and alone, had hidden the truth in two places so that no single fire could burn it all. The trouble was that one copy sat in her hands, and the other sat behind a church door she had no power to open. Mamazuri died 3 days later with Amara's hand in hers. At the graveside, in the red village earth, Amara made a decision instead of a prayer. No more being carried out of rooms, no more being thrown into roads. She wrapped the burned photograph in clean cloth, pressed it to her chest, and swore she would set it in front of Obina's own eyes. But one poor woman with a photograph is a small thing against a lawyer with an empire, and word of her questions had already reached him. She went straight to the only person who had shown her kindness. She found Kofi outside the law firm and told him all of it. The archive, the confession, the words on the back of the picture, the second copy waiting with a pastor. He listened, going paler with every sentence, and when he finished, he was quiet a long time. Then he told her a truth of his own. "The lab that ran your test," he said, "belongs to Tunde. Buried under 3 other company names, but it is his. I have filed the papers myself." So the test had been a lie, exactly as she suspected, engineered to bury her. But Kofi was not finished. "There is more, and it is worse. For 20 years I have watched Tunde run this whole empire from behind Obina's back. The chief believes he owns everything. He owns almost nothing." Kofi's hands were shaking. "If I help you and we fail, he will kill us both. I have seen what he does to problems." Amara looked at this frightened, decent man who had spent money he did not have on a stranger's shoes, and she took his hand the way she had on the back step. "Then we do not fail." They worked at night after that. He copied files from the firm. She walked to Pastor Jelani's small church herself and found the old man still alive, still keeping a sealed envelope he had guarded for 22 years, never knowing it named a murderer. But he was bound by NECA's own instruction. The envelope could be opened only for the authorities, under proper order, for a death proven to be no accident. Amara left it there, safe and locked, a weapon she could not yet fire. And somewhere in those long nights, between the fear and the whispering, the thing between her and Kofi stopped hiding. Neither said the word. Both knew. What Kofi dug out of the firm's old files was the ugliest piece yet. In the weeks after the fire, while Obina could barely stand, Tunde had brought him documents to sign. Just protection for the company while you heal. Blind with grief, Obina had signed everything, and with those signatures had handed Tunde legal command of his entire life. The grief had not merely broken Obina, the grief had been the purpose. Now Amara understood the shape of the plan. What she still could not understand was the reason. What kind of man burns a family to take a company? The answer was not money, and it was worse than she guessed. They chose Chief Obina's anniversary gala to strike. Society watching, cameras flashing, a place too public for Tunde to make evidence quietly vanish. Kofi would get her in. She would put the photograph in Obina's hands before the whole room. It was brave, and it was clean, and it was already compromised because the woman who reported everything to Tunde still shared Obina's bed. The night of the gala, the palace blazed again. A convoy of black cars poured guests through the gate in a river of gold and laughter, and Amara slipped in the service entrance with the photograph pressed against her ribs and her heart slamming. When the moment came, she walked straight through the crowd toward Obina and called his name so loudly the music died. 200 faces turned. This was it. "Chief Obina," she cried, holding the burned photograph high, "your wife was murdered, and the man who did it is standing at your shoulder." She pointed at Tunde. The hall gasped as one. Obina took the picture with shaking hands, stared at his dead wife's face, turned it over, and read. For one shining second, she watched belief break across his features like sunrise. She had won. And that was the exact moment the ground opened beneath her. "Enough," Tunde said, calm as stone. He gestured, and 2 security men seized Amara's arms. Then he drew out his phone and made a single call. "Officer, the thief is here as I warned you. Come and collect her." Within minutes, real police entered the hall, and Tunde faced the stunned crowd wearing the weary sorrow of a wronged man. "This woman has harassed my grieving friend for weeks. She forged that photograph. It ends tonight." "It is not forged!" Amara screamed, twisting against the hands. But Tunde had already leaned close to Obina, his voice dropping low. 22 years I stood beside you. I buried your wife with my own hands, and you would take a stranger's word over mine?" Obina, terrified of being the fool again, worn down by 100 false daughters, hesitated. That hesitation was all the room Tunde needed. "Take her," he told the police. Then came the cut that went deepest of all. As they dragged her toward the doors, Amara saw who stood at Tunde's side, murmuring into his ear. Kofi. Her Kofi. The shoes, the copied files, the man she had let herself trust. He would not lift his eyes to her. Tunde rested a hand on his shoulder like a proud father and said, "You did well, boy." And Amara felt the whole thing collapse into one sickening truth. It had been a trap from the first kind word, and she had walked into it holding the hand of the man who built it. They put her in a cell that night with nothing. Her mother's photograph was in Tunde's grip and surely would be ash by dawn. Mama Zuri was buried. Obina doubted her. Kofi had sold her. She had wagered everything and lost everything, and the wall around the villain showed no crack at all. Alone in the dark, she finally stopped fighting and wept until she was empty. It looked from every angle like the end, but the very pride that let Tunde win was the flaw that would bring him down, because Tunde had done his winning out loud. There were two things the great man did not know that night. The first was Kalu. The hard-faced head of staff had spent years watching Tunde treat the household like dirt and give orders no honest man gives. And Kalu, trusting nobody, had been quietly recording him the whole time, hoarding every threat and crooked instruction as insurance against the day he might be blamed. On the night of the gala, from the shadows, he had recorded Tunde phoning the police to take Amara and calling a photograph forged that he plainly knew was real. But hard men do not risk their lives for strangers, so the question was, why this one would? The answer was the second thing Tunde did not know. Kofi had never turned at all. When Tunde uncovered their plan, he had seized Kofi first and given him a single choice: play the traitor and lure Amara into the open, or watch them both die that night. So Kofi made a terrible bet. Wear the mask, keep his life, and stay close enough to Tunde to finish what she had started. Leaning in to whisper at the gala, he had not been betraying her. He had been reading, straight off Tunde's own phone, the address of the storeroom where the last originals were kept. Amara, weeping in her cell, knew none of it, and Kofi had one night to prove it before the evidence burned. He went to the only man in that house who hated Tunde as much as he did, Kalu, and told him everything: the fire, the murder, the stolen child, the woman rotting in his cell for telling the truth. Then he asked for the recordings. Kalu stared at him for a long, cold moment before he answered, and what he said carried a secret 22 years old. "I knew that baby. I was the gateman here when Madame Neka was alive. I carried that child on my shoulders." His jaw worked. "I always knew that fire was a lie. I have waited half my life for someone brave enough to prove it. Take the tapes. Bury him." An old guilt, kept in the dark for 2 decades, became the thing that lit the fuse. And the church door Amara could not open now had a key, because a murder ruled an accident was about to be ruled a murder. Kofi and a lawyer she had found carried Kalu's recordings and the newspaper archive to a magistrate, enough to reopen the case as a homicide. And with that order in hand, old Pastor Jelani finally broke the seal on Neka's envelope he'd left him 22 years before. Inside was a second charred photograph and a letter in her own hand. Not just a name this time, a confession of what she had discovered about the man she once knew, and a line that explained everything. "He has never forgiven me for choosing Obina. He would rather see us in ashes than see us happy." They bailed Amara out at first light, and this time nobody crept through a service door. They came in daylight to Obina's home and laid it all on the desk before his eyes. Kalu's recordings of his best friend's voice, Neka's sealed letter in her own hand, and a fresh DNA test run at an independent hospital under court order, watched by officials Tunde could not buy. Obina read his dead wife's words, heard his friend confessing on tape, and looked at the paper that said at last the truth. Amara was his daughter. The strongest man in the city came apart quietly at his own desk. There was only one question the papers had not fully answered, and it was already half answered in Neka's hand. Tunde did not run when the honest police came. He stood in the great hall, cornered, and when Obina asked the one question left, his careful mask finally slipped. "Why? I gave you everything." Tunde's eyes were wet in a way more frightening than rage. "She wrote it herself, didn't she?" he said. "So you already know." He did not deliver a speech. He gave them one broken sentence. "I never meant the fire to take her. I only wanted to take everything else. But she was going to tell you, and I panicked, and by morning I had told myself it was justice." He looked at his oldest friend. "She chose a builder with nothing over me. I could forgive the world before I could forgive that." For one terrible breath, the room almost pitied him. Almost. But love that murders is not love, and every soul there knew it. Tunde, last of all. The police walked him out past the same society that had once laughed beside him. His empire, which had always been Obina's, came undone in a single week, because papers signed under grief he had manufactured have no power in law, and fraud built on murder collapses under its own weight. He went to prison an old man, alone, having destroyed with his own 2 hands the only thing he ever claimed to love. No judge could have designed a fairer sentence than the one he served every night after, knowing that Neka's own voice, kept safe for 22 years, was what finally buried him. The story did not end in fireworks. It ended quietly, the way real things do. Chief Obina did not simply become Amara's father. She had spent 24 years certain she was thrown away, and no single test could wipe that clean. So he did not bury her in money or try to buy back the years. He sat with her in the evenings and listened. He asked about Mama Zuri, the woman who had saved his daughter while he mourned an empty grave, and he wept when Amara described the leaking roof and the counted coins. 2 wounded strangers began the slow, awkward work of becoming family. It was not tidy, but it was true. Chinello left the moment the money's real owner was revealed, slipping out to whatever corner of Tunde's ruined world would still have her, and no one grieved her going. Kalu, the hard man who had waited 22 years, was given charge of the whole household and at last allowed himself to smile. And Kofi stood at the edge of every room, sure Amara would never forgive the whispering he had done at the gala, not knowing she had long since learned what it cost him. She found him in the garden, in the same spot where he had once warned her about the smiles in that house. "You lied to me," she said. He nodded, bracing to be sent away. "You lied to Tunde to keep me breathing," she went on, softer. "And you came back when running would have been easier." She took his hand, the way she had on the back step with a pair of new shoes between them. "I do not want a man who never fails me," she said. "I want the one who comes back." And for the first time in the whole long story, Kofi lifted his eyes, and he smiled. On the day Obina finally buried his wife properly, a real grave, a real stone, 22 years too late, Amara stood at her father's side with Kofi's hand in hers and old Pastor Jelani reading the words. When it was done, in front of the quiet gathering, she sang the lullaby one last time, the same soft, sad song in her mother's old dialect, the song a cleaner had once been ordered to sing for the amusement of cruel strangers. Only now she was not singing for them. She sang for her mother, and for the woman who carried her out of the fire, and for the little girl who had never once been thrown away. And when the last note faded, no one laughed, they only wept. And somewhere inside that sound was the whole meaning of a song that had waited 22 years to finally come home.